Well, welcome back, friends. It's good to see you again and to be able to reflect this week on what is possibly the most famous of the many famous scenes in David's life, the occasion when he defeats the Philistine prize fighter Goliath. My guess is that when most of us first came across David, it would have been through being taught this story, maybe in Sunday school. And I think it's fair to say as well that this is the story about David which has worked its way most into popular culture. Every year, on the first weekend of January, football matches are played in the third round of the FA Cup when clubs from the lower leagues take on those from the Premiership. And when there is a shock result, we always describe it in terms of giant killing. I wonder where we got that idea from. This is a remarkable story, and there are so many things that we can learn from it. I'm sure that many of us have been inspired by sermons we've heard on it, reminders of how God can help us overcome apparently insurmountable obstacles with His help. But what I want to focus on this week is what this incident might teach us about David himself and what's going on in his head and his heart. And there are three things I want to focus on in particular. So, first of all, I want to think about David's self confidence. Now, this is something which is commented on by a contemporary Jewish rabbi, David Wolpe. He makes a comparison between David and other great figures of the Old Testament like Moses, Jonah, and Jeremiah. Those other figures come across as either reluctant to take on the task God has assigned to them or full of self doubt about whether or not they can do the job. But as Wolpe comments, there is none of that with David. You get the feeling that he knows that if he has to fight Goliath, he will beat him. And it also seems to me that self-confidence is working on a number of levels. Remember that David knows he has been anointed king, but at this point in the story, it's not clear how he will become king. And I wonder if, as David arrives on the scene, he is beginning to join the dots. He knows that there is an opportunity for him here to announce himself, to make a mark. There's a very telling moment in verse 26 when David asks, "What will be done for the man who kills this Philistine and removes his disgrace from Israel?" You can almost hear the cogs whirring. He can see that there might be an opportunity for him here. When I think about David in this scene, the word that comes to mind is an old Hebrew one, which has made its way into our everyday English, chutzpah. You could translate that word as audacious. And I think leaders need to be audacious. We need people who can demonstrate confidence and courage at key moments. Think of Henry V at Agincourt or Churchill during World War II. And I actually think this is one of the key differences between David and Saul. David comes across as a man who will run towards a battle, and Saul as someone who will run away. David has a swagger about him that Saul just can't match, a kind of cometh the hour, cometh the man quality. And that brings me on to the second point I want to make about David, which I guess is connected to the first. The fact that Saul, or David, is comfortable in his own skin. When I read this story, I find myself thinking about one particular scene which almost has a degree of comedy about it, and yet it's a telling detail. There's that moment which is described in verses 38 to 40 when Saul encourages David to try on his armour. So Saul is this figure, he's got all the fighting gear, he's able to provide it to David, even though he's unwilling to go himself. And David doesn't want it. He doesn't need it. If he's going to fight Goliath, it will be on his terms with a sling and some stones. And of course, it should be noted that this is more than just bravado on the part of David at this moment. He might only be a young man, but he's tough. He's got plenty of experience as a shepherd in taking on lions and bears. He can look after himself. And then there's one more aspect of David's character which we have to reflect on as we consider this story, and that is David's faith in God. And we see this coming up time and again in David's story, and it is one of the things about him which I think draws us to him, while also making him such an enigma. That yes, he can at times behave in ways which are infuriating, and yet we cannot deny that he is a man who loves God, and his relationship to God is, I think, really the enduring relationship of his whole life. I think there's a strong case for saying that the turning point in this story is verse 26. I've already mentioned it once, but let me remind you of what David says in the second line. He asks the question, who is this uncircumcised Philistine that he should defy the armies of the living God? Why is this so crucial? It's because this is the first time in the story that God is mentioned. And the mention of God is found in the words that come from David's lips. Now, as we all know, once you introduce God into any occasion, things change. Things become possible that were previously impossible. I find it particularly telling that David refers to God as the living God. It's a term that speaks of his faith in God and his power, a way of naming God as not just an idea or a concept, but one who is strong and powerful and able to do things right here, right now. And you also feel from David, not just a faith in God, but a love for him, a love for his name, a sense that he is genuinely affronted that anyone should speak with such disdain about God. And you also see that later in the story, at the moment of its climax. David stands before Goliath and is about to fight him, and Goliath looks down at David, and you can feel the arrogance and the condescension just coming off him in waves. Am I a dog that you come at me with sticks? And at that moment, David famously says, you might have your sword and your spear and your javelin, but I come to you in the name of the Lord Almighty, the God of the armies of Israel, who you have defied. At the key moment of confrontation, David could not make it clearer that this is not about him, but instead it's about God. Many years after this battle, after many other enemies had been defeated, including Saul, David sang a song in which he gave thanks for all God had done for him. And you can read it at the end of 2 Samuel, in 2 Samuel 22, or you can find it in the Psalms, Psalm 18. And there is a moment in the Song of Praise where David says this, you, Lord, keep my lamp burning. My God turns my darkness into light. With your help, I can advance against a troop. With my God, I can scale a wall. And I think we have there a wonderful insight into what made David tick. It's a reminder that beyond all his great personal qualities, the bravery, the charisma, the audacity, there was a great love for God and an awareness that he was only the man he was because of God. He is a complicated man, David. Seems full of contradictions, but any one of us with any degree of self-awareness will read his story knowing of our contradictions as well. So that's all we have time for this week. But I hope you found these reflections helpful, and that you will also find it helpful to talk now about the questions you'll find in the booklet that accompanies this series. So bye for now, friends, and I'll see you all again soon.